And now it's time for the final part of the whole process, and in my opinion, the most important one, and I put out this statement a lot of times, I think the lighting can really make or break your scene. So if you invest a lot of time in your modeling and everything, carefully create your composition and all the details, then it's really important to give your lighting a lot of time, maybe do more versions of it, return to it a little bit later to really get the most out of your work that you already put in. And for this one, I'm looking for a nighttime setting. We want to get most out of those like particles and all of those shapes around and really create some sharp lighting with beautiful shadows that will really elevate all of that sculpted details we already done. And with night illustrations, I always start with a little bit of ambience to kind of simulate the light coming from a night sky that's lit by the moon or something. So a little bit of that bluish tones that will reflect on our surfaces. But before we do that, let's set up our preview a little bit better. I will now go to the render preferences and let's set up the EV engine, because that's the engine that the material preview uses. So let's check the ambient occlusion so we get more of that cavity information here, and we can enable bloom so we get a feeling of where, you know, the most of the light is, how bright it is, and whether it creates some interesting effects. And then it's really important to check the screen space reflections. That will really elevate the quality of the EV preview here. And these three settings are basically enough for higher quality preview. And right now we just need to go here and in the viewport shading set scene lights and scene world, so we get the real-time preview of our lighting. And right now we can proceed and put that first ambient light that will simulate our night sky. So let's press Shift A and we'll start with area light. I really love to use area lights. I really like the fall off on that light, so it's really interactive to move it around, you know, closer and further from your scene and see what that does. And now let's rotate this a little bit, and I want to bring it up. So let's press G then Z and bring it approximately like 3 times the height of the tower here. So something like this. And now let's go to the light settings here in the object data properties and let's set the size to 2. We want this a little bit larger, but not too much. I want like a better defined shadows from that direction. And now let's switch shape to disk and let's pick some color here. So I will click color, use the eyedropper tool, and let's pick this blue light that's reserved for this night sky ambience here. And we'll need, of course, to bring the power up. So let's start somewhere around 1000 watts. And this is something that I had in mind, you know, that blue tone coming from a moonlight reflected, you know, on the atmosphere and stuff. So I really like this. And now let's find some angle. So let's go back to the camera view by pressing numpad 0. And what I like to do with these dioramas is to position this ambient area light behind the scene so it reflects nicely towards our camera. So first of all, I will rotate this 45 degrees. So first let's switch pivot point to 3D cursor. We want to rotate around the middle of our scene. So hold period and switch to 3D cursor. And now let's press R, X and 45 degrees. And let's hit minus so we go to the other direction. Let's hit enter. And now let's press R, Z and 45 to position this exactly opposite of our camera. And I really like this reflection so far. So this is what I'm going for. And you know, this is sort of a starting point. I always start like 45 degrees from the side and 45 degrees from behind. And then when I have more lights in the scene and I see all the reflections and shapes and how they are defined, then, you know, you can always like tweak these settings and position the light along its local x-axis and, you know, bring it forward or backwards, play with the strength. So this is kind of a starting point for me right here. Maybe we'll leave it that way, maybe we'll tweak it a little bit. And now it's time to add some other lights. Now we got a little bit of that ambience and rim light there, some reflections, but our shapes and our textures, our sculpted textures are really lost there. It's really flat, so we need to bring it out. And the best way how to do that is, you know, cast some light from the side to get that structure, those shadows pop up a little bit more. So let's press Shift A and let's add another area light. And now I want to move this like twice the height of the tower, so let's press G, Z and move it up. And let's repeat some of these settings. So I will again set this to disk, but I want this light to be a little bit larger, so let's set this to something like 5 or maybe 6 meters, because we are now creating a fill light from the side. And let's set the strength to something like 500. We don't want this to be as strong as the first light. And let's set the color to the orange. I always find really nice contrast with blue and orange tones. It's the combination that just works and I really love to use it. I read somewhere that maybe it got to do something with the orange light from a fire in the night sky when humans were like gathering around the fires and stuff like that. Like that's the comforting thing, that's the default thing that makes you safe and makes you feel good. Maybe it's true, maybe not, but I feel like this combination just works. And now we can rotate this a little bit, so let's press R, X, minus 45 again. And now let's press R, Z and 45 degrees minus. So we get this nice side ambience. And now we'll rotate this a little bit and place it a bit better. So as I said, this is kind of a default position. And right now we can tweak it a little bit. And here I can see right away that I want this a little bit more from the side. So let's press R and X twice, so we are able to rotate it on the local X-axis around that cursor pivot point, so we are able to bring it down. And you can see the difference on the reflections on the roof and on the wall. We want to cover more of that wall and cast a little bit more of these shadows right here on that entrance. And now, you know, we can play a little bit with the Z position, so let's hit 0 on the numpad so we can see our camera angle. Let's press R, Z, and we can rotate it a little bit, maybe to uncover a little bit more of that entrance here. So this is the way how I approach lighting. I decide what kind of ambient light, what kind of area light I want to shine from sides on our object, at what intensity and color, and then, you know, tweak them and really look at the shapes and the texture of the model to get the most out of those. So it's kind of a unique process every time. So even though I'm following these guidelines, it's always a unique process and the results are always different. So I will strongly suggest against like lighting templates and stuff like that. They're great as a starting point to get a mood, you know, and to inspire, but then you always need to tweak it to get the best results possible. And here I want to go a little bit backwards here, so we don't get this like a large smudge on the background, and we don't need that strong of an ambience on the side of the tower. So let's press G, then Z twice and move it a little bit back so we get this kind of more smooth gradient. And I'm really starting to like this, and I think this is enough in terms of like ambient setting when it comes to area lights. We have that blue night sky light and a little bit of that orange ambience from the side, which suggests that maybe there's some like a bonfire burning next to it, or there's a watchtower with fires, whatever you want, but there is some ambient light coming towards our scene, and that's enough basically, because we don't want any like strong sunlight and stuff like that. This is a night scene, so this is enough in terms of ambience. And to finish it, to mix it up a little bit better, I like to mix in a world color to blend those colors a little better, to give this like a coat of colored light that will kind of bring all together. So let's do that right now. Let's go to the world settings and we can play with the color. A lot of times I range this from kind of these blue cyanish colors to all the way to purple, somewhere here. Those are the colors that work best for me in terms of like world lighting. I didn't have a great results with like greenish or red tones. Might be useful in certain situations, you know, so always play with colors a little bit, explore that color wheel, but this works best for me. And right now I want that like a dark blue violet color here that will really fill our shadows with that violet dark blue light and blend these together in those nice gradients. If you want the same result as I have, you can pick the color here. Even slight change of tone can do a really big difference. So I've spent a lot of time probably tweaking this color. That's why I'm gonna use it right here. So it's not easy, you know, to hit the color at first try. So you're welcome to use this one, or, you know, tweak this a little bit to find something better that works for you. So this is starting to look much better, but it's only like the default night ambience set around the object. It lights the scene nicely, but objects themselves need some better representations. They're still like lost in the shadows and stuff like that. So we need to bring it up a little bit more. We need to emphasize some things like the entrance there. And the best thing to do is to use point lights here and there. I really love this technique, and especially at the night scenes where you can just distribute the point lights around your scene and basically play a little bit of a hide and seek with the camera, where you hide some light so well that it creates ambience and the light and shadows you need without like any notable source of the light. So it's a little bit of a painting with light. Basically, you just look at your scene, you can see what objects might need a little bit better lighting, and you try to come up with creative solution how to place that point light so you get the best results. And I can see right away we'll need to place some point light in the entrance, and I would like to hide some light around the tree somewhere so we get a little bit more of that sculpted shape that we spend a lot of time on. And I will probably want to emphasize the light from the side here. So let's start with the entrance. I think that's a good starting point, and that will probably be a very strong focal point of the whole composition, so it will be good to start there. So let's press Shift A and add a point light. Let's press G, Z and bring it up. We can rotate a little bit. So I want to place this at the top, somewhere behind. So again, we don't want the light source to be visible because there isn't any. We just want the light to be at that position where some light might be. So let's press G, then X and move it inside the entrance. And now we'll move it inside like this, and maybe more towards the right. We'll see how the shadows behave. So to really see the difference now, we'll need to set up the light. So go to the object data properties, and first we'll need to pick up the color for our light. So let's click the color, eyedropper tool, and pick this orange light. And let's set this to something strong like 250. Let's confirm. And this is something completely else right away. You can see how this defined our scene a little bit better. The entrance is now visible. The shape of the tower is a little bit better defined, and most of all, we are creating these nice shadows on the ground here, on those tiles, and on the structure of the tree as well. And now, to better see how that point light will behave on different positions, we can press G, then X, you know, and move it to the side a little bit, and you can see how you can define where it will actually shine. And I really like something like this. I think the position was great right away. Maybe a little bit more towards that tree. Okay, and I want to leave this light with that small radius. I want this to be like the most sharp light on the scene. And now let's try to create some nicer lighting here on the side of the tower. I really like that ambience, but I would like more rich gradient, maybe with a little bit of a yellow color. So let's press Shift A and let's add a point light, and we can press G, then Z to move it towards the middle of the tower, and let's press G, then Shift Z to move it somewhere here, and let's increase the radius to something like 1. We don't want this to be so sharp, and let's set this to 25. I don't want it to be very strong, but you can see how it kind of changes this gradient, adds a new color to that. So let's click the color and let's pick this more yellow light here. And this is what I'm talking about. It kind of just complements the area light there. It paints the wall with the nice gradient without actually defining a really strong light that will be notable. So I really like this. Let me check it from the side here, from the camera view, and you can, you know, move it around like this to find a little bit better angle or position that you really like. So something like this will be enough in my opinion. And if you zoom out, you can really see the gradient, how it better defined the rounded structure of the tower there. And I want to do the same treatment for the tree. As I was saying, I want to bring the structure a little bit more, and we did a good job on that with that point light from the entrance, but I want to add a little bit of a rim light there as well. So let's press Alt D to duplicate this light, and let's press Shift Z and move it somewhere here behind the tree, and let's find some better position for that. So I'll probably position this a little bit further away from the tree and a little bit higher up, so it kind of sits behind those branches and hides there. And now this doesn't look like much, but if you press H, you can see the difference, and Alt H, if you unhide it, it really better defines the structure. And it doesn't really matter that there is more light here, because we have the light from the entrance here anyway, so this patch of light on the grass isn't that much of a problem here. And now I want to add one last point light that's behind the tower. I really want to differentiate better between the objects in the scene. I want the tower to pop up more, to give it more of the rim light behind. And we can use the fact that this will be hidden behind our tower. So let's look from the top by pressing number 7. Let's press Shift D and duplicate this here. I'm using Shift D right now because I want to change settings. Before, with these two lights, I want them to be the same. So we can position it somewhere here. I think the height is good. So the story may be that there is actually a window here on the tower. If you want, you can use booleans and a new object and sculpt an actual window there if you like. That would look really cool if you want to animate the rotation of the scene here or something. Totally up to you. I just want to hide here a little bit of the light and bring up the power to something like 150 and change it to that orange light, so it's same as the entrance, since I'm kind of suggesting that it comes from the tower, and this will really help us to like divide the foreground and the background of the scene. And we can now make it a little bit smaller, those 0.25 like before, and go a little bit closer towards the tower. And now let's find that rim light that we really like. Something like this would be fine. Yeah, I'm happy with this, so let's move on. And there's one final thing we can do to blend the scene, the colors a little bit better, and to create a really nice dispersion for the lights, and that's adding a volumetric fog in the scene. It will produce a little bit longer render times, but I found that the results are really worth it. So let's add a fog right now. I'll just press Shift A and add a cube. You can of course add a cube in the world settings as well, but I like to apply the volumetric material to an object, so I have a better flexibility of scaling it and, you know, work on it locally rather than have the whole scene covered in fog. So let's now just scale up this cube, and we can move it a little bit up. So press G then Z and move it up like this. And we basically need to cover the whole frame here. So yeah, something like this. And now we need to rename the object. So go to the object properties and let's call this fog. And now we can go to materials and create the new materials. Let's call this fog 2. And first thing we need to do is remove the principal shader from the surface node. So let's remove that one. It will produce a black cube. And we can collapse the surface and we can expand the volume node. That's what we are interested right here. And let's insert the volumetric shader. We have the principal volume shader for that. And let's modify the density to something like 0.025. So it's really just a slight touch, but you can see it right away how the area lights disperse in the fog. And that kind of creates this code of color over your scene that helps to blend it a little bit more. And I really like the effect. So let's go back to the camera view. And now we can blend it even further by applying some color. But be very careful about the color here. Only a light touch is enough. So let's just move this from the center to a little bit of a bluish tone like this. And you can see how this immediately changes towards the blue. We don't want too much, just a slight touch like this. So yeah, I really like to do this. You can see it right away that it's a little bit coated and hazy, covered with that blue color, and the lights, the orange and blue lights, are more dispersed in the scene. So right now I will just lock the object by disabling the selectable here so it doesn't get in the way, same as we did with the particles. And speaking of particles, this might be the time where you want to have a look at that as well. If you're satisfied with like the scale and position of these particles, if you want to change some settings. And now we can move on and switch to the cycles render preview and see if this is lighted properly for the cycles render as well. So let's press Ctrl B to limit the rendering only to a camera view so we can save some performance there. And let's go to the render settings, scroll up, and I don't think we need this anymore, so I will just click here and drag down to collapse the palette image. And right now we can switch the render engine to cycles, and I will switch to the GPU compute. Make sure you have the GPU active in the preferences as well. And right now let's start at 512 samples. And of course I want to enable denoising. So for the render I prefer OpenImage Denoise. It's CPU based, but it produces really great results. And for the viewport, since I have the RTX NVIDIA card, I can enable optics here. You can go for OpenImage here as well, but it will be slower, much slower. So with optics viewport enabled, we can now hold Z and turn on render preview. So this is what we get right now. Here I'm running 3090 RTX GPU, so if it's much slower for you, don't worry about that. There's nothing wrong. Generally the volumetric materials take up a lot of resources, but still I think it's worth for still frame rendering. I really like the lights here. Basically I don't want to change anything. Maybe they are not so vibrant as before, but keep in mind we had a bloom active there. Here there is no bloom. And you can of course do that in the compositor, but I like to keep the cycles render without the glow filter. I enjoy that great edge definition on the cycles render. So yeah, that's it for the lighting, and right now we can move on to color management. That's one of the last steps I always do when I have my scene lighted up and prepared. I play with the exposure and the contrast look. And especially if you have volumetric fog present, but not for a reason to have a fog in the scene per se, but to better blend the colors and the lights and create the dispersion, you can play with the contrast to suppress a little bit that fog effect and really get only the benefits that it produces. So I will now switch to something like high contrast or even maybe very high contrast. And you can see how this helped to suppress that fog, but we still have that light dispersion there and that blending. So I really like this. And now we can bring up the exposure a little bit more. And here you can see how this comes really alive with all those gradients and beautiful colors. So I think something like 1.5 will be great with that contrast setting here. And you know, we can go ahead and select the particles object. You can of course increase the count for these particles, whatever works for you. I think I will leave it like this. I think I like it like this. Maybe we can go back to that seed 1, increase the number to something like 60 or 55 and make it a little bit smaller. So I will enable selection and make it smaller like this and move it a little bit closer towards the camera so it doesn't interfere with the tower there. And you know, now it's time to really play with the light, so you can always go to the render preview, check these reflections, and you can always like move these lights a little bit around to find some better position. Maybe I will tilt it a little bit like this to get more of that blue reflection on the roof shingles there. So let's check it out. Yeah, definitely this is slightly better. Yeah, this is the place where you iterate, where you start to move these point lights and basically paint with that light image you really want. The don't be afraid to do one more run, you know, start from scratch, delete all the lights, create something new. It's a learning process and it's never linear. So yeah, that's the fantasy tower for you. Congratulations for finishing the episode, for getting all the way here and hanging in there with all that tedious sculpting. And again, the purpose of this episode was to produce beautiful illustration that you can use on any design you want, and use some of those sculpting techniques to get a little bit more of that creative freedom. And when you compare that with the texturing workflow, you know, you always need to like find the maps and play with UV settings and map and stuff like that. This approach is more direct, it's more creative. You basically have that object and you just interactively shape it into something you want to see. So that's why I really like this, and the stylized results of this approach are really beautiful in my opinion. So again, congratulations. I hope you enjoyed this and that you like your result, and I would definitely love to see your results. So, you know, whether on Instagram or any other media, just mention me with your post that you finished the episode. You know, I will gladly have a look. So that's it for this episode, and I hope to see you on another one.